Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. It's August 17th. And this is a sizzle reel. This is going to introduce this very special video interview with Kevin Albin. I've been waiting to do this for a long time now, because Kevin is truly one of the most interesting people I've ever met, diverse in his, well, actually, here's the title. Why don't I just read the title to grab you all? So it's Kevin Albin live from Paris, France. That's where Kevin is now. As a matter of fact, to prove it, he's wearing a little bit of a sweatshirt because it's chilly in Paris, France right now. Of course, it's probably 9 or 10 o'clock at night. So he's chilly in his barn. Kevin is a conservationist. He's the author of Stonechild, which I'm going to keep showing. It's an amazing book. I started to read it. It's kind of haunting. So he's the author of Stonechild. He's a mountain and jungle guide. He's been around the world, places like Borneo and Cambodia and Venezuela, Vietnam, Nepal, top of Kilimanjaro. And so interestingly, he's a former police and hostage negotiator in England. So that's the sizzle reel. That's what we have to come in this interview. And the sizzle reel is over. And Kevin, I'm so thrilled to introduce you. If maybe let's just do if you can do a quick bio. Take it away.
Well, I mean, thank you very much for that sizzle reel. I feel immensely proud of myself.
Should be.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Okay, so I fell into the police force at the age of 18 after having run slightly foul of the law, just a typical teenager, sort of drunkenness and that sort of thing. And it led to a career of 25 years, including working on a tactical firearms team. Many of your listeners will probably know that the police in the UK are not routinely armed. They have specialist teams to deal with terrorism and violent crime. It's true, I worked for many years as a hostage negotiator, which also involved suicide intervention. So there's a double facet there, but it's about listening to people and trying to get them to perhaps calm down sometimes when the situation is very tense. I had a change of heart back in 2002. I'd almost finished my career, which would have meant a big pension, but I had a complete change of heart and decided to retrain as an international mountain leader and set about an 18-year second career, traveling the world, taking people on expeditions, so working on conservation, as well as youth development, so taking teenagers away and involving them in what they often perceive to be a hostile environment, because when we're in a hostile environment, we become very attentive to the person looking after us. And whilst they're very attentive, that's a great opportunity to teach them things and allow them to learn about leadership and teamwork and working together, those sorts of things. Problem solving. Since then, I've diversified a few times, and I've been involved a lot with conservation, and that really, I set about some work in Borneo back in 2003, which was a real game changer for me. I was working on behalf of the Royal Society, planting hardwood trees, working on mapping fairly remote areas. They'd only seen 3 or 4 expeditions beforehand. And I developed a very close interest and relationship, I suppose, with trees, tropical rain trees in particular, and how they help us, how they allow us this simple exchange of carbon dioxide, oxygen. I mean, that you know, it's I wouldn't say I'm a religious person, but my goodness, what a fantastic relationship, and why on earth are we destroying the rainforest? So I went in more and more into conservation work and sort of educating myself and getting some qualifications, very basic qualifications in that sort of thing. And then, of course, the pandemic came, and we were all shut down, and I couldn't work with clients, and I couldn't have the opportunity of trying to educate people and get them to look at a different perspective. And I took to writing a young adult novel, Stonechild, and that's the result of the confinement, with some thought process behind and some research, and more recently, because of the pandemic, I've retrained as a mental health first aider, because it's clear that we are in a very difficult state. We've been confined, we've been isolated, we've been challenged with something that we've never had to deal with before, and there is going to be some fallout. Mental health issues are going to be very prevalent, and I wanted to be equipped to be able to help people and do something with it. There we go.
Talked about that before we went on air. I was so intrigued by that. I've interviewed mental health people, but people call you up because you're in the system, you're in the app, and people call you up to talk to you, just to talk to you, and you give that time, that precious time, to talk to people who just need a little bit of support. I mean, that's a wow.
Yeah,
that you do that.
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting thing with time, Calvin, I feel, is that time is only really relevant to us if we keep looking at it, if we keep measuring it. If we say that I'm not really bothered with time, I'll just get everything fitted in, of course I will. You know, if someone rings me and says, I need to talk to you, I'll give them all the time in the world. That's a very human thing to do. I think that's what we should all be doing. I think that's probably what we've lost. We spoke off air, as you say, to do with why have we lost the contact with nature, and why have we lost the contact with each other? The harmony that was there, has been there, isn't there any longer, and for all sorts of reasons. Pandemic's an easy answer, but also we're being faced with problems to do with climate change, loss of biodiversity, destructions of the oceans, pollution with plastics. I mean, the list goes on, it's endless. That, I think, has made us very angry, very frustrated. We lack the comprehension, we don't know what to do. And it's driven us into a state where we really are no longer in tune with the world and no longer in tune with each other. So it's clear to see why mental health issues are going to be more and more prevalent.
Wow. So I'm kind of, there's so much to unpack with you. I'm trying to collate the thoughts in my head. So you've gone from the background in London with all that police work for all those years, and suddenly you're climbing mountains. You're a conservationist. You're in jungles, and then back in 2011, you win the Bronze Award for I'm looking at it, Wanderlust magazine. You're like a world guide. Just quick couple of comments about that.
It was a period I'd embarked on a new project for me. I don't know if this exists in Britain, in the States. It certainly doesn't exist here in France where I live, but in Britain, the system of charity work or charity challenges, where people try to raise money by doing a challenge, and climbing Kilimanjaro is a good example.
Wow.
So you have a cause. You may have lost someone. You may have dealt with cancer yourself. Someone with diabetes, whatever the reason is, homelessness. But you decide to raise some money for a charity. We have a lot of companies in the UK that facilitate you doing an extraordinary challenge, and you raise the money for it. That money then goes for the trip. Half of it goes to the trip and the other half goes to the charity. It's a kind of win-win situation, because you go to Tanzania and we use hotels, we use local guides and porters, we use local transport, we use the airline, we use me as a guide. So everyone takes something out of that economy, and of course the charity end up with a huge amount of money. So it's very, very popular. There was a
Interesting.
time when I was doing a lot of that work, and I suddenly the light bulb went on, I suppose, in my head to say, do you know, there's a lot of people who have come here not just to raise money. They've got good reasons why they're raising that money. You know, I started listening more and more to their stories, you know, and asking the question, why are you here? What was it that's happened into your life that made you do this fantastic thing, you know? And there were people that had lost partners. There were people that had lost children. There were people that were in remission from cancer. The list was enormous. And I suddenly realized, and perhaps from Negotiator days, was that I couldn't just guide them to the top of Kilimanjaro or Great Wall of China or Machu Picchu. I really should take this opportunity and facilitate them being able to speak to each other. Wow. and get it off their chest, why they're there, what have they gone through. And the result of that was that we very quickly, by facilitating these almost counseling meetings as we're walking, you know, there's on Kilimanjaro, there's not much more to do but walk slowly for 7 odd days. So we facilitate this sort of cathartic conversations, and we united as a team. I mean, I experienced the most wonderful bonding, and I think that's how that came about, was that people then went home, and in this competition run by Wanderlust magazine, and it's a wonderful competition, and with great sentiment from the magazine's perspective. I ended up with lots of votes and lots of comments about me, and came third in the world. So yeah, I was deeply honoured. I ended up at the Royal Geographical Society, and the award was presented by Bill Bryson.
That's great.
Yeah,
I should kind of tell folks that in a couple of days, there's a group that you are in called Authors and educators on a mission. It's an environmental group that I've kind of dropped into, and we're going to kind of be brainstorming ways to kind of educate and teach and motivate young people, especially in light of the IPCC last week, the United Nations Climate Report that issued Code Red for humanity. So there's this great need to kind of move, especially young people, and which is kind of a segue. You wrote this for young people. Talk about the evolution of this and the driving forces, because it ain't easy to sit down and write a book. You did that. Talk about Stonechild.
Sure, thank you. Some years ago, I was working in London on a corporate training day, and it was a glorified treasure hunt, to be honest. But it was based in London with a top firm, and they had to go around London and gather some clues and find answers for them. We were stood in front of a statue, the Royal Tank Memorial statue, which is a group of 4 or 5 men, and my clients were taking ages. And I just pictured the statue coming to life with the answer for their clue. And I'm sure lots of people have thought about statues coming to life. You know, we often speak to statues or wonder, you know, what was it like? What would you say to me? Those sorts of things. And as I'm standing there in London in the heat of the summer, and this idea came to me and grew and never went away. And I did some research and made some notes, but didn't really do much with it. The confinement gave me the time really to sit down, put it all together, get my notes together, start writing. I had already done some writing. I write articles for magazines and things like that, and I played around with short stories. And little by little, the story really led me into it. And it's about the statues of London. It starts with Sir Winston Churchill, who comes to life in the House of Commons. And he plays an important role to say to the government, you know, what you're doing isn't enough. You've got to make some really radical decisions. You need to lead the people. They're looking towards you. And then at the same time, the statues of Brunel, Shakespeare, Florence Nightingale, and of course London comes to a standstill. It's chaotic. No one can understand it. You know, they're trying to explain, and Churchill does give some explanation that when he died, he was in a different place, and the building of the statue embodied his spirit. And normally they wouldn't come alive; they just observe. But because the situation is so dire, this time they've come alive. Molly Hargreaves is a 15-year-old young lady who lives with her brother. Interesting background on where she's born and how she's been educated. And she doesn't believe the statue. She thinks that there's something amiss, and she sets out to prove it wrong. She's chased, captured, confined, and by the statues, and it's a ripping yarn, an adventure running around London. The statue of Sherlock Holmes is involved, and it's got some humor in it, and there's some cryptic clues that Molly needs to work out, and but at the same time it also gave me an opportunity to perhaps express some of the things that teenagers go through. I have a teenage son. You know, I know what his emotions and his frustrations. I try to look at those. I try to express maybe or invite the reader to look at some of the social standings. You know, we talk about particularly with women, whether they should be a certain shape, size, weight, those sorts of things. So the book very loosely touches on some of the social issues that young people are dealing with. And yeah, I'm very pleased with it, and certainly the response has been very good. So.
Now, I'll keep you posted, and I will when I'm done. I will write my impressions on this.
Brilliant, thank you.
I was so intrigued when the statue. I'm not giving anything away of Winston, because you mentioned it. When his foot starts to move, the statue, it's like, whoa, you know. And so I mean, I just got it from Amazon, so I have a long ways to go, but I'm so intrigued by this. And my impressions, you're not that, the statue coming to life ain't it's not out of the realm of my world. It's just not. You know, our links to the past, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I'm kind of going off on a tangent. So I actually off topic. I think you'll like this question. We didn't discuss this before we went on air, but I like this question. And here it is. It's a one-word answer, Kevin. So don't. So here it is: living or dead, excluding family or friends, somebody you'd like to spend a day with. It could be one or two, or it doesn't have to be any. But it's a kind of a cute question.
It is a cute question, yes.
It is. It is a cute question. It's a revealing question, I think. I don't know.
Yeah, you've put me on the spot there, because I haven't given it any thought whatsoever.
I apologize.
No, not at all, not at all. I think, I mean, an obvious answer is someone involved in the environment, of course, and Greta Thunberg, certainly. You know, I'm sure she gets wonderful advice. It really, I find it very disappointing and frustrating when people criticize her and pick on her when she is really trying to make a difference. You know, as a she has driven the youth movement on the environment. I think she's a wonderful young lady. I think she's very brave, and I'd like to tell her that. I'd like to say, fantastic. This, you really have made a difference. Please keep going, because you have the capacity to do a lot for us.
Correct. She is an embodiment of the whole youthful movement. Okay, I'm sorry I sprung that on you, but
Not a problem. Not a problem. I
okay,
like a
good.
challenge.
Good. So we also discussed the whole institution of government not working, and we also discussed what this great environmentalist Michael Mann said about the largest fuel company. If you could elaborate on that, he said something I thought was so profound that probably would ignite a whole global movement.
Yeah. If we touched on anger, frustration, those sorts of things, and when I look at my book and I want it to be popular, I want it to be in the mainstream. Of course I do. I want people to suddenly go, oh yes, of course I've got it. You and I share the same frustration in that we can't convince people. You with a brilliant podcast, and it should have a greater audience than it actually does. And we've already talked about the effects of the great audience that TikTok commands, those sorts of things. But when we look at what is wrong, I look at fossil fuel use and climate change and biodiversity and the plastics, all the things that we know that are there. And so why can't we convince people? And I think the reason is that it's far easier to look at something that is pleasing, that doesn't require us to take action, such as TikTok. It's far easier to look at that than actually question whether we've got the right heating system, whether we're using a diesel, petrol or electric car, or whether we could eat less meat. So people are easily diverted. There are some deniers, of course, but they're getting smaller and smaller, in my opinion. But we're easily diverted onto something that is easier to think about and more pleasurable than actually the real situation. Michael Mann has written a book called The New Climate War. I think it's an absolute stunner. I urge everyone to read it. And he points out, in the first part of the book, he points out that we've been hoodwinked by the fossil fuel industry, much the same tactics as used by the tobacco industry, the gun industry, the alcohol industry, all of those. They have very clever tactics. They invest vast amounts of money to convince us that their product is the thing to be bought. The fossil fuel industry have known for a long time that their product is warming the atmosphere, is warming our climate. Now he says, he describes that what they've done and their tactics are dirty tactics, without a doubt. But also in the second part of the book, he describes that really and truly, if they could change and put all that effort into renewables, and the technology is there, and if it's not there, there's money to be made in the innovation and inventiveness of creating that technology. That is the answer. And we will change, not overnight, but very, very quickly, with our reduction in the use of fossil fuels and the ability to use renewable energy. In one of his interviews that I watched, he was asked, what would be the one single thing that you would like to see happen that would be a domino effect from around the world? And he said, get the largest fossil fuel company to admit that what they've been doing has been misleading, that they know that they've been doing wrong, or that the atmosphere has been heated up because of their use of or their production of fossil fuels. Get them to admit that, and that we are in crisis. That would be the one thing that would make a major difference. Now, that struck a chord with me, because we're all in this game together. You've spoken about the group that I'm in and the panel that we're going to do on Thursday, and we're trying to convince young people and all generations, really. And should it be that we change from diesels, and should we get solar panels, and is it our responsibility? Is it government's responsibility? Is it big business? Whatever it is. But for me, that really struck a chord, is that actually, with all the carbon dioxide and carbon gases and methane particularly that's being produced, well, we can't come up with just solutions that are going to make it better. We need to stop it at the source. You know, it's the same with cutting trees. We can talk about, oh, we're going to plant new trees. Well, that's nonsense. Why don't we just stop cutting the old ones? You know, that makes much more sense than all these projects of planting new trees. And it's the same with the fossil fuel industries. They come up with new schemes, and we could use natural gas, or we can do carbon capture, those sorts of things. Well, let's just stop using them in the first place, and that would make a major difference. And that, I think, certainly with our group, that's the message that we need to get across, is to say, can we convince the fossil fuel industry? Can we put pressure on government to stop using fossil fuels? And we may stand a chance of actually reversing this with less consequences than if we don't do it.
A reversal thing, that's a little depressing. If we stopped, where did I read, if we stopped everything tomorrow, it would take Mother Earth a couple hundred years to kind of fix things.
Yeah. And that is, and of course that you're expressing there, that's a depressing sentiment, and of course it is. And of course, for most people not in this game, not as aware, that is too much. And it's easier then to say, well, it's all lost, I can't do anything about it, and let's watch TikTok. But that actually isn't the case. All is not lost. Yes, it may take time. But what the issue is that we've talked about 1.5 degrees of global warming, 2 degrees, but every point something of a degree that we save makes things much better for the whole world. And of course, as often is stated, it's become very clear now, is that the countries and the people that have contributed the less are the likely ones who are going to suffer the most, because they don't have the infrastructure. And that is appalling. And we in the West, in the States, in the developed world, need to recognize that we are responsible because we've contributed mainly to it, and we need to really do something about it.
Off topic a little. I'm not, a couple of months ago, I was kind of surfing around and I saw a little blurb about a company in Iceland that was sucking out carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and mixing it with concrete and using that combination to make sidewalks and streets and roads. In this way, I don't know if you heard about that. Maybe I dreamt it. I'm not sure. I before I even brought this up, I was meaning to kind of look that up to see where that came from up here. But the point being, we're awfully good technologically, and it's not depressing because we can come up with things when we have to come up with things. That's the point. And if they're doing that and mixing carbon dioxide with concrete, hey, that's great. Anyway, back to you. This is a quick, because it would take hours, but if I mention a place, if you could just make because it so intrigues me, your background and where you've been. I don't get out of Jersey much, but I mean, so I'll mention a place if you could just say a sentence or two about what you did there. I just think it's.
I mean, there's a slight proviso, of course, is that I've contributed quite hugely to the climate problem in that I've travelled by airline. I mean,
hey, it's not a perfect world.
No, and there's often been a balance. If I've done conservation work in Borneo, which has been, when we worked there on behalf of the Royal Society, my team alone planted 22,000 hardwood trees.
Wow.
So personally, I have to balance that and say I'm doing some good, but at the same time I flew there, and the pandemic for me personally, I haven't worked now as a guide for 2 and a bit years, and I question now, what do I do? I can't realistically go back to traveling all those air miles. I have to find something locally here in France. I'll continue to write, of course, and but I can't justify those air miles. Yeah. So yeah, shoot. Tell me what.
That's not why that was not even remotely on my radar. The fact that you went to these places to do what you did is so germane to conservation. And it's not a perfect world. You had to fly there, of course. So all right, Borneo. You spent time in Nepal.
Yeah. So the Nepal trip to do with young people. It's sort of development. You take a group of young people, as I've expressed, and take them into an environment that they don't know anything about, but you engage them with local people so that they understand a different culture. The whole point of that is for them. We talk about racism is rife in many countries, of course. And you get them to rub shoulders with people of the same age to see how they live their lives. The interesting thing with that is that these are 16 to 18-year-olds predominantly. Many of them will come back having seen people that live in very fundamental or rudimental accommodation, no television, no internet, no technology, and for the immediate part of returning home, I've heard many times of, I'm going to help mum and dad with the washing up, I'm going to clean my room, I'm going to get rid of the television. Now that doesn't last, of course, because peer pressure, and it's perhaps unrealistic to expect that. But we plant a seed, Calvin. We expose them to something to say, you've visited the Himalayas, you've climbed this particular mountain, you might be up to Annapurna base camp, and you've rubbed shoulders with local people, you've been through some hardship, and these expeditions were a month long, and you're going to go back and drop almost back into your old life, but now you've got a story to tell. Now you've got a memory of someone else who lives on the other side of the world. Don't forget it. Bear it in mind for the rest of your life. It's given you perhaps some strength because you've had some hardship, but also remember how other people live their lives. So powerful stuff.
Powerful stuff. You were in Vietnam.
Yeah, I've worked in a sort of combination of Vietnam, Cambodia, that sort of area. Some of the work, we worked in a rape center and domestic violence center. So that is, I suppose, an exposure to that. When we have to use translators, and we bring our own skills of negotiation and listening skills and some mental health things and that sort of thing. And again, it's trying to understand and educate. There's very much of a facilitation there, certainly on domestic violence, of trying to gain some sympathy and empathy for the aggrieved, but also trying to educate men that is not correct. That is unacceptable. In Cambodia, as we've mentioned, Cambodia, I worked in an orphanage run by a monastery for severely handicapped children. These are children that will not, they had children with enlarged heads or other deformities. They're never going to have any form of recognizable life, and they're looked after by the monks there.
Wow.
It's emotional work without a doubt, but it gives you a great understanding, and much of this is also about funding. We bring money to this. We pay for our experience, and quite rightly so. we get accommodated and fed, but also there's a contribution to the monastery, or there's a contribution to the rape center, so that they can build extra bedrooms and those sorts of things.
Well, just one more, just to illustrate that you're not only in the Far East, you're in Venezuela.
Yeah, what a beautiful country that is. We did some mountain climbing on the Tepui, Mount Roraima there. There I worked in a village. This because we were building furniture. I'm not a carpenter, you know, saw and hammer and nails, building furniture for a school. And we developed such a close relationship with the school, with the head of the village, and my students were messing about with their students and that sort of thing. Anyway, towards the end of the expedition, I was approached by the head man to say he has a particular student, a young boy, who's good at maths, speaks a little bit of English, not much, but seems to be bright, but he was their nominated choice. If the school, my school, was interested in funding him, he could be sent to the main town and be educated and to learn English as well. And the idea is that he would then come back to the village, ideally setting up ecotourism, which would of course bring money into the village itself. Very nicely, my school accepted, and they've been paying for his education for many years. Yeah, and that was a completely out. That wasn't on the agenda. That wasn't part of the expedition. It was completely out of the blue, and it was very wonderful to be able to facilitate that. And I've lost touch with them now, but there was, you know, an annual report saying what he was doing and how well he was getting on, and a lovely story.
Well, I mean, to me, it's a wow, living what you do, and seeing the places that you see. It's real. You're real. Your commitment is real. I think this last segment, I'm just to get your input, your wisdom. I'll throw up a couple of environmental themes if you would comment on them. These are things, you know, these are things I read about. I try to process some of these things. I mentioned to you, I mean, when I was in my 20s, we're trying to harness Gen Zs. I got harnessed a bit on April 22nd, 1970, the first quote Earth Day. And it was like a little slap in the face to me. Oh, wow. And that was the beginning of my consciousness. And it demonstrated itself when I stopped eating anything with 4 legs because of methane in cows, and even their burping that people don't know about contribute to methane. But listening to your journeys around the world and your commitment to me is just such an oh wow. And sometimes it makes me say, oh, I should have done stuff like that, but I hate airplanes. Because I don't fit. That's why. Now I'm 6'5". You may not see that, Kevin. I hide my height very well, but I'm 6'5" and I don't fit in airplanes. So be it. So your comments just on some environmental themes, because the melting of glaciers.
The thing with this list, you know, these topics, and anyone that takes an interest in learning about the melting of the glacier will instantly learn that global warming, there's a tipping point, there's a critical moment when the ice is no longer reflecting the sunlight and therefore melts even faster. And there's a common theme in all of that. You know, I wrote an article for a magazine to do with oceans and plastics, and the great garbage patch in the Pacific.
Yeah.
When I did the research on that, for example, I thought there was only one. There are 5 of these,
Oh.
and there's the one of them is the size of Texas. And you realize that it's not floating bottles, and I've diversed from glacial melt. It's not just floating bottles, it's microfibers, because they destroy, or they fracture in the sunlight, and now the sea is opaque, and of course nothing lives underneath it because there's no sunlight. So the fish life and algae and plankton particularly all die or move away because it's inhospitable underneath this plastic. The whole point of where I'm going with this, Calvin, is that if you take an interest in this, as people do and are doing more and more, then what do we do with that? That's the issue, I think. We some of the other conservationists that you've interviewed, and there is a strong sentiment about evidence and where we're going and what the evidence is, and the loss of biodiversity and the number of species that are being eradicated. We're in a great extinction at the moment, much the same as the dinosaurs. And the eating of meat and the production of carbon dioxide and industry. I mean, the list is long. We know it's there. The issue, I think, is what action can we take? That's where we, as conservationists and scientists and people that are involved in this is where we need to be driving our force. This is where we need to say, how do we put pressure on government? How do we convince the fossil fuel industry to change? How do we convince the plastic, which is part of the fossil fuel industry, that's how it's produced, that has been a complete sham, in that only 10% thereabouts, that's a very optimistic view, only 10% of all the plastic in the world ever produced has ever been recycled.
Correct.
And we all fill the recycling bins, but it doesn't go anywhere. It's just too difficult. And no one's saying stop recycling, because 10% is better than 9% and better than 0%, without a doubt. But how do we carry on? Why is it that we carry on in this this hoodwinked position, or really not doing anything about it? I think that our effort now needs to be not in so much in educating people, but getting them to act, getting them to say enough is enough. That you did that, dumping plastics in the ocean, you did that without my permission. I thought it was going to recycling, and you've dumped it in the ocean. That's not my consent. You need to stop that now. We need to find a different way of doing it. Whatever the cost is, we need to find a different way. And if we could motivate people into that, because I think what we've been doing for a number of years is giving them facts and figures, sometimes scientifically, sometimes less so people can understand, but that hasn't motivated them, because it's too much. The problem is too much. It's easy, as we've already said, TikTok and social media is a great diversion rather than tackling the problems.
Yeah.
And we mentioned off air, I think where the change will come will be big business, because they've already realized that there is money to be made in innovation and invention. They're the ones that will start and drive it forward. And we need to convince our government to be leaders and stronger and make things happen. The money that gets paid to the fossil fuel industry, the subsidy that gets paid, is vast, and vast in comparison to the subsidy that isn't paid to the renewable energy companies. That has to change, and it has to change like tomorrow. It's no good saying, oh yeah, we'll do that in 10 years. We haven't got 10 years. We need to be changing that now, and we need a very strong government to say, right, fossil fuel industry, very sorry, subsidies are cut. Renewables, you get those subsidies, right? Go to town, invent things, innovate, and really make it happen. And we could see some changes. But we, the people, because we're the ones with the power, the real power, we need to push that and push the governments and the big corporations to make changes.
You know what, there's other things to throw at you, but I think you've just said it all. You know, we the people, we the species, we've got to, you know, kind of make the changes. It's so overwhelming. Yeah, I do get overwhelmed. You get overwhelmed. But we said this before we went on air, that, you know, we keep re-inspiring ourselves because there's a big job to do, and, you know, it's education, it's getting the messages out. And it's funny, you talked about species in the research I did before. No, I watched, I cheated. I watched the video, which is on your website, which everybody should know. Your website, all your contact information is going to be flashed on the screen. But you know, I watched a video in top 10 environmental facts, and you know, it kind of blew me away. You just said it. You just said it. You know, every 20 minutes we lose a species here on Earth. And you're right, 10% of all the plastics only get recycled. It was maybe a year ago or less when there was a thing that came out in the papers. It's funny, they come out and maybe they make it on page 2 or 3, but China stopped taking our plastic recyclables.
Yeah.
So we never knew that. We just shipped it all to China. I don't know what they were doing with it, but they said no more. So the stuff comes back here, and you know, we recycle twice a week, and I'm sorry, twice a month,
Yeah.
and I don't know what happens to the stuff, because I don't think it gets recycled.
And it is bewildering. It is. I've just had 6 weeks up in the French Pyrenees, and part of that was because I was getting to a point where I'm not coping as well as I should do, and I took myself off to Mother Nature and spent time in the mountains and the forest. And I'm very fortunate that I've got the capacity or the availability to do that. And that's recharged me. That recharged my batteries. It made me back in tune with Mother Nature. I've met some local people, and the sites are very beautiful. And we you know, not everyone relates to nature or the countryside, but whatever you relate to, people should really look at the world and say it is an amazing place. It is an absolutely amazing place, and we're an amazing species.
Yeah.
And the road we're on at the moment is very, very destructive, and we've got to wake up to it and do something about it. And people, you know, it's not saving the planet, because the planets can survive no matter what. You know, it's had a history of being uninhabitable, but we as a species, we must survive, and we need to act in order to survive and survive well. And we are capable of it. Of course, we're capable of it. We're very intelligent. We have great innovation. We have the ability to solve problems, and we owe it to all the other species on the planet as well, you know, that are less capable, that are going to suffer, and we owe it to them. We're the ones that caused it. We owe it to them to help them to survive as well.
Well said. And this is just a point to kind of conclude this. Of course, you're going to come back because we're going to be doing things with this group, and we'll come up with ways to reach out to the youth and try to ignite and teach. There was a great song in the 60s, Teach the Children. Crosby, Stills and Nash, one of my favorite songs, Teach the Children. And we need to teach the children. And that's part of what this is about, teach the children. So I want to thank you, Kevin, beyond, for your time and your graciousness and your passion and your energy and your commitment, and for staying up a little late, a little bit late. And you will figure out in our group, you come back, we'll figure out ways to kind of spread the message around. But I really, really, truly, I want to thank you because you made my day. You did.
Likewise, likewise. You know, I've looked at many of your interviews,
Well, thank
and
you.
you've captured some amazing people without a doubt. And you know, so thank you for your efforts and what you're
Thank you.
doing for our species. Yeah.
Thank you. Love the species. So to be continued. Thank you, Kevin. And we'll reconvene. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Kelvin.